Hi everyone. So we have already discussed the concept of consumer surplus and producer surplus. We learned that consumer surplus is basically the gains or benefits um, uh, enjoyed by the consumers or buyers when they participate in the market, and whereas the producer surplus reflects the benefits or gains of the producers, suppliers, sailors, when they sell something in the market. Now, in this video, I'm going to show you uh, what is total surplus, and I'm also going to show you the efficiency aspect. So starting with total surplus, now total surplus is basically the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. So remember when we talked about welfare economics, we said that the primary question welfare economics attempts to study is the total economic welfare. That is the well-being of the society of all the people. So how the society can be benefited. Now, total surplus measures that total economic welfare. Now, how do we calculate total surplus? It is very easy. We just add consumer surplus and producer surplus. That's it. So we know consumer surplus is willingness to pay minus market price, and producer surplus is market price minus economic cost. So we get willingness to pay minus economic cost. So note that this economic cost referred to not only the seller's cost of materials and labor, but also it takes into account the opportunity cost of the seller's time and effort. So remember that economic cost is basically the willingness to sell, because at the minimum price level at which the supplier would sell the product. Now, total surplus is maximized at the market equilibrium price. So I'm going to talk about this, showing you a graph. So hold on to that. Now remember the example of soft drink we used in our previous lectures. So you wouldn't pay more than 20 taka, and you bought a bottle of Coke at 15 taka. And your seller wouldn't sell a bottle of Coke less than 12 taka, and eventually sold the product at 15 taka. So what would be your what would be the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the total surplus? So the consumer surplus would be 20 minus 15, 20 being your willingness to pay, 15 is the amount paid, which is 5 taka. Producer surplus would be 15 minus 12, 3. And the total surplus would be thus the summation of consumer surplus and producer surplus, which is 5 plus 3 is 8. Now, also one thing that this all the price that I'm talking about, it's per unit. Okay, so 20 taka per unit, 15 taka per unit, like that. So total surplus would be 8 taka per unit. So the number of units that have been sold in the market, so 8 taka per unit. So market equilibrium. So remember, we also talked about the supply and demand curve, and also the market equilibrium, how the market functions. So we found out that at the market equilibrium price, we reach efficiency. By that I mean that all the resources, allocated resources, are being used, are utilized in the most efficient manner. Now, all of this can be explained graphically. So this is the green shaded region is the consumer surplus. The light purple, I guess, shaded region is the producer surplus. And so the total, so this part, so this is your, this is this area, this two consumer surplus plus producer surplus, this area gives you the total surplus. Now comes the question, why did I say that the equilibrium point is the most efficient point? That, in other words, that all the resources are being utilized efficiently, and also this sort of this ensures the total economic welfare at this point. So the reason for this is, if you move above the equilibrium price, here this is the equilibrium price. If you move above the equilibrium price, you see a problem of surplus. So inefficiency, irregularity. So if you engage in a market where the price is below the market price, then you observe another sort of problem, which is shortage. So there are irregularities. And also try to understand this, that a buyers, so this point, at this price level, the buyers at this price level are willing to pay this amount of money for that product. So that is their maximum willingness to pay, right? So any buyer below this here would not actually engage in the market, because at this point some buyers would not participate in the market, because the consumer surplus uh, would decline. So you will have a lower consumer surplus, right? So by this point, I mean the buyers whose willingness to pay is at this point would not actually engage here, because this is not the maximum willingness to pay. So the consumer surplus for this, let's say this, so this shaded region is actually lower than than the consumer surplus what you see here. So this is one sort of inefficiency. And also in case of producer surplus, try to understand this point gives us the cost, right? The lowest cost. So the sailors or the producers at this point would definitely participate here in this market. What about the sailors whose lowest cost is at this point? Do you think they will engage? Well, I don't think so, because the market would not be efficient. Because at this point, if you see, the producer surplus would be smaller than the producer surplus what we observed earlier. So these two extreme points, this also denote that uh, these are the points where the market is functioning efficiently, or the consumer surplus, you can attain the maximum possible consumer surplus in this market. And also this point gives you the maximum producer surplus that you can attain in this market. When I say in this market, I mean when this supply and demand curve is interacting here. So this is important to understand, that efficiency is attained at the market price, which is also the equilibrium price. Now, another thing is that, as I said earlier, if the price goes above market price or below market price, then we see irregularities or inefficiencies. So the market that we are talking about here is actually a free market. So by that, we mean that there is no intervention in the market. There is no sort of restriction. There's no restriction on this market. The market by itself is adjusting and also determining the price. So by itself means that the buyers and sellers are interacting in the market. So they are, let's say, they are bargaining, they're engaging. So through their participation, they determine the market price. So there's no regulation that is playing a role here. So, however, we will actually discuss how tax affects the market or the welfare of the society. So in the following videos, you will see the concept of tax and the effects of tax.